Hello, world of nodes, and welcome to this Fireside chat. We're missing a fire, I think, but okay, welcome to this chat with me, ABK of Neo4j, and my friend Emil Eifrém, CEO and founder. Hello.
Hi.
Good to see you, Emil. This is the second time we've been sitting on this couch. For those of you who are here in the audience, if you've gone through the European phase of this Nodes event, some of you noticed, actually, as I was listening on the chat or participating in the chat, this has been happening since 2 a.m. for European time. Like, hang on, there's a bunch of things that happened before we even woke up. Yes, that's true. All that's been recorded. There'll be, video of that available on YouTube sometime soon. So anything that you've missed, sessions you like, don't worry, you can still get that content. We're here live now at the end of the European segment. This is going to continue after this for another 8 hours through American time zone. And then you and I are going to be back on this couch again.
2:30 a.m., baby.
Answering some questions from everybody who's here. So thank you for the questions. We're going to get to that in a minute. I also want to say one more quick shout out to, oh my gosh, over these 2 time zones or multiple time zones through to where we are now, the number of talks, the level of quality of the talks, and the chat in the sessions along with the talks has been absolutely amazing, right?
Yeah, awesome.
Like, we've been doing this for so long. It's always been really good. This is like somehow even better. Like, you all have stepped it up in an amazing way. Thank you to the speakers. We'll come back to them again. And also thank you to the audience. Everybody here is really just amazing. Quick intros. So I'm ABK of Neo4j. I've been with Neo4j since just about the beginning, or just after like the launch of the company, employee 10. If you've used Neo4j Browser, Neo4j Desktop, those are products that I created. I'm now with developer relations, and so now I get to do more outbound stuff, more like actually working with people out in the field, and yet have been involved, of course, in many of the things over the years here at Neo4j. And Emil, you started this company a little bit before I joined.
Guilty as charged. So my name is Emil Eifrém. I'm the CEO of Neo4j and one of the 3 co-founders of the company and of the product. I grew up as an engineer and spent most of my teenage years in the not even proverbial basement, in the literal basement, hacking out code. Initially online gaming, grew up as an open source and Linux kid. And after a while ran into the problem that I was at a startup, had about 20 engineers there, and half of them spent the majority of their time fighting against the database. And I was in my early 20s, but despite that, I'd done a lot of software projects. And in all the previous projects, the database had been an accelerator. It took this big, gnarly problem, which is take the data, make sure that it's stored on disk. Like, no matter what happens, like once you give an ACK back, if the world, goes upside down, still the data has to be there, right? Make sure that it's transactionally, you can write and read to it in a transactional fashion. You can query it, online backups, multiple, that's a lot of payload, functionality payload that the database takes away from you as a developer, right? Which is a good thing, because then you can focus on building your application. Mm-hmm. And that had been my experience in all my previous projects. But something was different this time around. And what was different, we now know. As an industry, we have a language for this. But back in the days when this happened to me, we did not have the clarity of thinking, I guess, to realize what happened. It took us a while. We banged ourselves, our heads against the proverbial relational wall, until we figured out that there was a mismatch between the shape of the data that we were working with. We were building highly complex media asset management system that had lots and lots of data that was very messy and changing and connected. We tried to take that and we squeezed it into square and static tables. And that mismatch between the shape of the data and the abstractions exposed by the relational database, very inappropriately named relational database, that mismatch was the core reason why we had so many problems. That was the birth of the idea that maybe there's a better type of way of working with data. Fast forward 417 years, At least that's what it feels like. And here we are. That model that we ended up ultimately inventing is called, now people call the property graph model, which of course is what we do here at Neo4j.
There's a parallel to what's happening now in the market, the mega trend that is Gen AI that I want to tap into, that happened, I think, along the way in that growth, where you were solving a need, you just had something you wanted to do. And then it turned out that thing you did that built, that modeled the property graph model and how to think about the data was more than just what you were working on. Actually, it had lots of applications, impacted a huge amount of like potential solutions. And we're kind of like in the early days of that, I think still early days with Gen AI. We're like, okay, this is really interesting. And now we're trying to figure out what to do with it. Like, okay, we were trying to solve a particular problem with this, which is really fancy autocomplete. But it turns out, having solved that really well, it has kind of a longer tail, right? Okay.
That's probably the understatement of that next token prediction little thing. Yeah, it turned out to be fairly capable.
Quite a good, discovery. Let's hop into some of the questions, because I think this tees up perfectly like into some of what people want to ask us about, actually ask you about, and I'll field some of the questions.
You should point people to Slido in case they don't know.
Oh my gosh, that's right, for sure, thank you. And so, two things I'm going to actually point out on Slido. One is on the sessions that you're in on the platform. If you go to the chat and go to the public chat, at the top of that there's a message pinned with a link to Slido. If you have any questions for us, there's already some questions that are there. Add some new questions, upvote the ones that are there. That'd be fantastic. And actually, the second thing I'm going to say about the chat, I'm going to bring up after this first question. So let me get to that one first. And this has been, this is a very short question that I think can go a couple different ways, and we'll see which way you want to take this, but I'll if you don't mind, I'll take a spin on it first. Please. The question is just this. Neo4j 6, when? Here's where we're going to go back to the platform that you're on, and in that public chat, you'll also find a link to a developer survey. Because to me, a very close companion to the when is what, and also what in lots of different ways. But very particularly, I'm curious, like for people who upvoted that as a question, like, hey, when is this going to happen? I would love to know, what do you mean? Like, what are you looking for? And if you go to the chat, you'll find a developer survey link. Go take that developer survey, answer any of those questions, and along the way, you'll have the opportunity to say, here's the things I'd love to see in what, maybe it someday becomes Neo4j 6, or but just generally features you'd love to see that aren't already there. So please go ahead and fill that out. That's my quick plug for the developer survey. But then in the kind of, I think this is really a broad question about like what's next for Neo4j. Do you want to?
Yeah, and that, by the way, is also my kind of initial take on it, which is like Neo4j 6, like I don't think of it in that way anymore as much. Like obviously 10 years ago, like Neo4j 1 and then 2.0 and 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, like all that kind of stuff. That's when we were not primarily, but exclusively what we today would call a self-managed company. So we built the product, produced binaries, stuck them on our website as open source. People could download them and off they went, right? Today we are primarily a cloud company. We, of course, build the same core technology, but rather than building it internally and cutting it up like once every 6 months into a release and throwing it off the wall, we continuously deliver features and capabilities into the Aura platform that I hope you're all using, right? Now, we also, of course, do the self-managed releases, and they end up still being very valuable on laptops, right, on flights. Self-managed still has some capabilities that Aura doesn't have, like maybe complex custom topologies, things like that. And there's still certain situations where people can't use a cloud offering, right? In particular, some of the government installations, maybe financial services, things like that, right? So in that new cloud world, I go to exactly where you went to, ABK, which is like, what do you mean? Like, I think more of what capabilities are you looking for? Because I think that's the question behind the question really is
Right,
like,
absolutely.
what is the next, like, what are the next key kind of things coming out? That's more where I gravitate towards rather than like a specific release.
I think that makes great sense. And of course, we've been releasing continuously for a while now. And the other kind of part of the 6 part of it is that in a semantic versioning kind of sense, like that would be like a major breaking change. And we kind of almost don't want that as a database. Like the surface that you're working with is the same and actually simply gets better without you doing anything, right? That's the kind of go-to motion for us right now that we would prefer. So, right?
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that came up in the morning for us here in Europe, so the finishing Fireside chat for APAC, which we did, this morning, was kind of what are my favorite features. And one of the things that I used was this water bottle, which I don't know if you can see it on the on the live stream, but it says parallel runtime, right? And that's a great example of a category feature that you just mentioned, which is, hey, you write your own cipher, and all of a sudden we ship this new runtime, like down in the engine room of the cipher execution engine, right? That all of a sudden can parallelize this declarative query that you've specified, and you don't have to change anything. It'll just magically become faster, right? I love those kinds of features.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. This obviously is going to come up very quickly as a question, so we're going to have to get straight into Gen AI. Throughout this morning, throughout all from 2 a.m. through Asia Pacific, through Europe to now, many of the talks were about Gen AI. So Gen AI continues to be a hot topic, and this is what it's about. Lots of conversations about that, even at nodes. Yet out in the world, companies are stuck in pilot projects. We've heard in different forums. What's your take on like what's holding them back? Why can't we get past like, hey, I can chat with the PDF. Now let's go to production. What's going on?
Yeah, it was super interesting to hear kind of feedback from people on what is it called, Goldcast?
Goldcast, yeah.
Yeah. On kind of the Goldcast platform right now. People are listening in right now or on YouTube, what your experience is. But what we see a lot was reflected in a survey that I read about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, which is the IBM CEO and CIO survey. And one of the questions that they asked, well, actually many of the questions that they asked were about Gen AI, and they noted that between 70 and 80%, and we can debate on the margin, is it 90, is it 60, is it 70, is it 80, but like that order of magnitude of Gen AI projects were kind of stalled in POC mode, stalled in prototype mode, right? In other words, they got up and running with some smaller version, some prototype, but they were stuck trying to get it into production. And I see that a lot when I'm out talking to customers today. And I think there's a couple of things going on. One is I meet with a lot of teams that love the fact that they get to play around with these new Gen AI technologies, right? Because it is so fascinating. Yes, you can be cynical about it and say that it's overhyped and all of that kind of stuff, right? I get it, right? But at the end of the day, as a technologist, it's very, very fascinating. It's like computers learned an entire new dimension, an entire new capability. Like we could crawl before, now we can run, or something like that, right? Which is pretty amazing, right? So the teams love the fact that they're doing that. But when I ask them the why and how it started, many times it is, okay, you know what? The CEO had to have an AI story for Wall Street and had like some big buy-in and learn a big kind of insight or belief that AI can be better for his or her company. And then it kind of got handed off to the CIO or maybe the CTO, maybe the VP of innovation. And then it kind of got handed down into some tech team and thought, okay, cool, sure, would love to build with this new tech stack, but like, what are we building? Well, maybe customer support, something, and like the use cases aren't as crisp, right? And then at that point, well, you really want to see kind of clear ROI for anything like this because people are investing a lot. And maybe it started out in more of a fuzzy way than with more mature established technologies, right? And this is very natural. This is what it looked like for Neo4j 10 years ago versus today in general. So it's very natural for new technologies, right? Especially disruptive ones. So more kind of business use case risk than what I've seen before. So that's one piece. But then the other piece to it is the tech stack. The tech stack in this world, and those of you who play around with this, which I hope is all of you, honestly, because it is an important thing to learn, is just moving at a different pace than we've seen before. Like there are new models at the top of the leaderboards every week, right? Across Ben Lorick in his keynote today, I think highlighted 8 or 10 of them, but there's probably 20, 30, 40 more, and they are releasing at such a frequent pace. And then there's an entire ecosystem of technologies around it, which are all the frameworks with the LangChains and the LlamaInix and the Haystacks of the world and the Crew AI and the AutoGen. And then again, Ben Lorick's keynote this morning, he talked about like a bunch of other components like the evaluators, the routers, and there's multiple projects around them with daily release cycles, usually incompatible. And even if you manage to make them work together, then there's some new release that is incompatible with the one that you use. So like the tech stack overall is just much, much more volatile and in flux, right? So you add both of those things together, and I think that's one of the key reasons why we've seen a lot of Gen AI projects stuck in this kind of prototype phase. The one thing I'll add on top of that is I do think like a big part of it is things like, okay, I get it. I get some kind of a response back here, but why did I get this answer? Let's say it is a classic chatbot on top of my support documents, right? I got some response, but is it the right response? And more importantly, why did I get this response, right? So there's no explainability, right? Between like with a normal kind of RAG stack. Graph RAG offers up a huge advantage here because it can provide that visibility into that explainability. Also on the tech stack side, it turns out that once you have a knowledge graph up and running, it's actually easier to build your applications if you use graph RAG compared to normal RAG, because normal RAG is very opaque because vector space is very opaque, right? And so I actually think building it with a knowledge graph at the center offers up many advantages that can help push several of these projects out of prototype into production.
So now you've gone from, okay, we've proven we can do something, but also we can trust that thing we've built if you've done it with a knowledge graph, right?
You can trust and explain it.
And explain it, that's right, yeah. Okay, awesome. I'm going to move forward here. There's kind of a branch of that conversation, like within Gen AI, like in all the things that are changing, and where people start, I suppose. And the question here, that as it's phrased, is, from our view, from your view, what's the future like for VectorDBs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So vector databases is the first kind of new category, the first new category of new databases that come onto the scene for a while. Kind of the last time this happened was with kind of, let's call it the NoSQL era in the late 2000s, early 2010s, right? And then vector databases were actually around a few years before kind of the ChatGPT moment and LLMs. But that's really what made them kind of catch fire and catch on. I'm actually, generally speaking, relatively pessimistic on the future kind of durability of that category as a whole. I think there's a couple of things going on here, right? The fundamental primitive of doing vector search, I think, is very, very powerful. It's very important. Much like classic, call it BM25, inverted index text search is really, really powerful. If all that we could do was to do just primary key lookup in databases, right? That kind of wouldn't be all that fantastic, right? Being able to do text search is fantastic, right? And then this more semantically type search thing that vector search can do is a really powerful thing, right? But you don't generally require a dedicated vector database for that. There's like a lot of databases have added vector search support. We have added vector search support. Postgres has added it. Mongo has added it. Elastic on the search side is really at it, right? So there's a lot of databases that are adding this core capability. I actually think at the absolute high end, if you're building the next Google or something like that, you may end up with a more specialized system. Right. I think extreme scale usually ends up with like a different architecture than kind of the area, the more area under the curve, kind of under the bell curve, right? So I think that could happen, but I have a hard time seeing them becoming more mainstream adopted in the end.
In a way, you could say that, for the purposes of similarity search, obviously great technology for that. If you're just going to build an application, generic application, is that the database you're going to reach for, right? It has its feature set, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? And if you want to build a generic application, you probably want to have something that's good with structured data. And yes, the vector databases are adding some of, like, they tend to call it metadata, right? So that's basically structured data support. But the core DNA is unstructured data, right? And doing search on that. And is that truly the number one thing for your application? Probably not, right? It might be like an important part, but probably not kind of the core DNA of your application.
So I'm going to do a very graphy thing and like connect this to another question. It's a little bit further down, but I think it's really
nice graph traversal right there.
An interesting one, and one that, I don't know, you might have thought about before anyway, and you might have an opinion about. So I'd love to hear that opinion. And let me get the actual phrasing here right. Okay, so will graph databases replace or seize a significant portion of the relational database market? Is Neo4j working towards this?
I've never thought about that at all. So I don't think any database will completely replace the relational database. I think the relational database is super powerful, and it's been around for 40 plus years now. Invented, I guess, 45, almost 50 years ago now, right? And it's really stood the test of time. And I think being able to look at things in a tabular way and calculate averages and maxes and groups and aggregations and all that kind of stuff is really powerful. And we've proven out mathematically that the relational model can model any data, right? So I think it's going to be around, let's say it was around 50 years ago, which is a little bit of a stretch, but let's just say that. I think it's going to be around 50 years from now, right? Having said that, when I look at new applications, I actually think that over time, the relational database is getting less and less of a share of new applications. And I think that started even 5, 10 years ago. I think that trend will continue. We're entering into this plural world of multiple types of databases. And I do think that as the world is becoming more connected, there's more and more connected data in the world because data models the real world. So everything is becoming more connected, and its value in figuring out how things fit together. So data is then modeling that and being able to traverse that data in real time in a very developer ergonomic way. In other words, it's easy to do it, right? Not just possible, but easy to do it. I think there's only going to be more and more need for that. So I guess to answer the precise question, if I remember it correctly, no, I don't think graph databases will completely replace the relational database. But yes, I believe over time, graph databases is going to take an increasing share of new projects away from the relational database.
And maybe in this moment of time, in the current trend with Gen AI applications and starting, as people do with unstructured data, if I can tie that in, when you take unstructured data and you try to provide some structure to it, you realize there are many structures. Now, yes, you could model that with a relational database. You'd end up with like hundreds of little, relational tables. And we've all seen schemas that are like this, right? That you have this monstrous schema with hundreds and hundreds of tables, many of them join tables as well, and the actual semantics of the model have completely fallen apart because it is not as nice and compact anymore. That is naturally expressed as a graph. That's when you reach for a graph, and it maps in so beautifully with everything that's happening within Gen AI and obviously with GraphRag. It's such a good fit. from the heart, of course. Okay, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Let's see if we can get through these. Oh, and so taking a little departure from Gen AI, but like, in Neo4j, what recent features have shipped? You alluded to at least one of these. Maybe there's something else we can bring up. Recent features that have shipped that you're most excited about. So beyond parallel runtime, what is there?
Yeah, this is a similar question to what we got this morning, and it's like choosing your favorite child, right? And I love both Nomi and Leah and Ilse equally. I want the record to show. When they watch this 10, 20 years from now, I want them to know that I love them all exactly the same amount. Much like with all the new features in Neo4j. Having said that, kind of joking aside, there's probably a couple of things that I would call out. I already mentioned parallel runtime as one example, but maybe as an example of a category of features that I love when we make like these real kind of in the engine room improvements, right? Frecky, like the block store format and stuff like that is another example of that. MVCC, multi-version concurrency control, like things like that, hey, it's just a new version of it or new features shipped into Aura. And without even knowing it, your application is faster, better, stronger, that kind of thing. I love that. On the other side of this would be, okay, we just launched this, I guess a couple of quarters ago, this unified experience in Aura, which pulls together some of the tools that ABK you mentioned that you built. You actually only mentioned browser and desktop. You forgot Bloom.
Oh, in Bloom.
Yes.
Sorry, Bloom. Sorry. Yes.
Pulling that together in a unified experience, right? And I think that kind of stuff is awesome too. And then maybe the third one that I would add is I have a special kind of fondness in my heart for CLIs, for command line interfaces. Like, I'm a developer by heart. We grew up as a developer-centric company. Like, having a consistent, powerful CLI, I think is just it's an amazing thing for like a developer-centric product. So in no way are these my favorite, but 3 features that I choose to call out among many other equal features.
You've now made me feel that I've forgotten one of my children.
Yes, Bloom.
I'm sorry, Bloom. I love you as much as the others. I promise. It's just a small mental error. I'm going to now actually do another graph traversal over from exactly what you're talking about. As a developer at heart and a CEO, last question. What's better, being a developer today or a CEO today?
I love my job. Honestly, this is like maybe a rude and sad statement to end this on, but I have the best job in the world. So every one of you listening, you have at most the second best job in the world. And it's fantastic to be hands-on with new technologies and to build software and create software from scratch. There's something magical about that. And there's something magical about the focus of putting on your headphones, putting on intense music, sitting down, starting to build, upload the entire system in your head, and then wake up 3 hours later without even knowing what had happened, right? I love doing that, right? But having said that, as a CEO of a company like this, like I have this indirect effect that is much more amplified than the effect that I had as an individual software engineer. And being able to see, like, again, the parallel runtime come online along with the simplified import, along with the GraphRag Python framework, along with, like, that, like, maybe amplified impact is just fantastic. And then, like, on top of that, being able to work with amazing people, like amazing nodes here at Neo4j, and then seeing all the innovation that is being done on top of Neo4j. Things we could never have imagined when we invented the thing. It's like, okay, we just needed something to be better for what we did, and we felt other people would get value from it too. Now, NASA is literally going to get to Mars 2 years earlier thanks to that model. Cancer is being cured thanks to that model. I mean, how freaking amazing is that, right? And so you add that all up, I'm going to have to choose CEO as my favorite job over developer.
I love the way you've told that whole story and the genius of connecting that back to where we started the conversation, about this problem you were trying to solve that you didn't know apparently solved lots of other things, all the way to like the use cases you just mentioned. Emil, thank you so much. There are more questions that are here. Please don't hesitate to add. We've got one more session way at the end of the Americas tour of nodes. So please, keep the questions coming. We'll try to get through all of them. Emil, always a pleasure.
Let's do this again at 2 a.m.
I'll be back. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.